The dust kicked up around Eliza Hartwell's boots as she stood on the platform of Tombstone Station that scorching August afternoon in 1882, watching the train disappear into the shimmering Arizona horizon, carrying with it the only man she had ever loved and a secret she would never get the chance to tell him. 3 months had passed since that night. 3 months since James McCade had held her beneath the cottonwood trees by the San Pedro River, whispering promises of forever against her skin. 3 months since his brother had arrived at dawn with urgent news that their father had taken ill back in Santa Fe and James had to leave immediately. He had kissed her fiercely, promised he would return within 2 weeks, and then he was gone. The letters she sent went unanswered. The telegrams returned with no response. It was as though James McCade had simply vanished from the face of the earth, taking her heart with him. Now, standing in the merciless heat with her hand pressed protectively over her still flat stomach, Eliza knew she could wait no longer. She had a choice to make, and neither option felt right. Her father, the stern Methodist minister who had raised her alone after her mother's death, would never forgive her. The town would never forget. But this child, this tiny spark of life growing inside her, was all she had left of the man who had promised her the world. She turned away from the station and walked slowly down Allen Street, past the Oriental Saloon where tinny piano music drifted through the swinging doors, past the general store where Mrs. Henderson watched her with narrowed eyes from behind the counter. Everyone in Tombstone knew everyone else's business, and it would not be long before her condition became obvious. She had perhaps 2 months, maybe 3 if she wore loose clothing and stayed out of sight. The little boarding house where she rented a room sat at the end of Fremont Street, a whitewashed building with a sagging porch and windows that rattled in the desert wind. Mrs. Calloway, the proprietress, was a widow who asked few questions and minded her own affairs, which was why Eliza had chosen to live there rather than in the small house behind the church with her father. She climbed the creaking stairs to her second-floor room and closed the door, leaning against it as tears finally spilled down her cheeks. She had been so careful. They both had been so careful, but careful meant nothing when fate decided otherwise. James had been working as a ranch hand at the Triple Crown spread just outside of town, saving money to buy his own land. They had met at a church social in May, and from the first moment their eyes locked across the lemonade table, Eliza had known he was different from every other man who had tried to court her. He was 24, just 3 years older than her, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of winter sky. He spoke softly but with conviction, and when he smiled at her, the whole world seemed to shift on its axis. Their courtship had been proper at first. Supervised walks through town. Sitting together at Sunday services with her father's watchful gaze upon them. But James worked long hours at the ranch, and proper courtship required daylight and witnesses, neither of which aligned well with a cowboy's schedule. So they had begun meeting in secret. Late evening walks by the river. Stolen moments behind the livery stable. And then one night in July, beneath a canopy of stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch, they had given themselves to each other completely. Eliza crossed to the small mirror hanging above her washbasin and studied her reflection. Her dark blonde hair was coming loose from its pins and her green eyes were red-rimmed from crying. She looked tired. She looked frightened. She looked exactly like what she was, a young woman facing ruin. A knock at her door made her jump. She quickly wiped her eyes and called out, "Who is it?" "It is Mrs. Calloway, dear. I have brought you some supper." Eliza opened the door to find her landlady standing there with a covered tray. The older woman's face was kind but concerned as she stepped inside and set the tray on the small table by the window. "You have been crying, Mrs. Calloway observed, closing the door behind her. "And you have been looking poorly for weeks now. I may be old, Miss Hartwell, but I am not blind." Eliza's breath caught in her throat. "I do not know what you mean." "Yes, you do." Mrs. Calloway's voice was gentle. "I had 4 children of my own, God rest 3 of their souls. I know the signs. How far along are you? There was no point in lying. Mrs. Calloway would know soon enough anyway, and lying only made the shame feel heavier. 3 months, Eliza whispered, maybe a bit more. The older woman nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful rather than judgmental. And the father, is it that McCade boy you were seeing? He had to leave for Santa Fe. His father was dying. He promised to come back, but I have heard nothing from him. Eliza's voice broke. I think perhaps he never meant to return at all. Or perhaps something has happened to prevent his return, Mrs. Calloway suggested. The world is a dangerous place, child. Men do not always have control over their own fates. It does not matter now. What matters is that I am alone and I am going to have a baby, and my father will disown me when he finds out. Mrs. Calloway was quiet for a long moment, her weathered hands folded in front of her. There is a woman in Tucson, she finally said. She helps girls in your situation. She can make it so you do not have to face this difficulty. Eliza understood immediately what the older woman was suggesting, and the thought made her stomach turn. No, she said firmly, her hand moving instinctively to her abdomen. No, I could never do that. This baby is mine. It is all I have left of him. Then you will need to leave Tombstone, Mrs. Calloway said matter-of-factly. You cannot stay here and raise a child without a husband. Your father's position in the community will not protect you from gossip, and the child will suffer for your choices. Where would I go? I have no money saved. I have no family except my father, and he will want nothing to do with me when he learns the truth. Mrs. Calloway moved to the window and looked out at the dusty street below. I have a sister in Tucson. She runs a boarding house there, much like this one. She is a good woman, and she understands that life does not always follow the path we plan. You could go there, have your baby in peace, and perhaps find work afterward. No one in Tucson knows you. You could tell people you are a widow, that your husband died in a mining accident or some such story. Hope flickered weakly in Eliza's chest. Would your sister truly take me in? She would if I asked her to, and I am asking. Mrs. Calloway turned back to face her. But you must leave soon, before your condition becomes obvious. Once people start talking, there will be no escaping the scandal. Eliza nodded, her mind already racing ahead to all the things she would need to do. She would have to tell her father something, some explanation for her sudden departure that would not reveal the truth. She would have to pack her few belongings. She would have to say goodbye to the only home she had ever known. When should I go? She asked. Within the week, if possible. I will write to my sister tonight and arrange everything. You will tell your father that you have been offered a position in Tucson, helping to care for an elderly woman. He will not question it. He knows you need to make your own way in the world. The relief Eliza felt was almost overwhelming. She crossed the room and took Mrs. Calloway's hands in hers. Thank you. I cannot tell you what this means to me. You are a good girl, Eliza. You made a mistake, but that does not define who you are. This baby deserves a chance at life, and you deserve a chance to be happy again. The older woman squeezed her hands gently. Now eat your supper and get some rest. You have a long journey ahead of you. After Mrs. Calloway left, Eliza sat at the small table and forced herself to eat the bread and stew, though her stomach was in knots. She kept thinking about James, wondering where he was and what had happened to him. Had his father recovered, and James simply decided that a ranch hand's life in Tombstone was not what he wanted? Had he met someone else in Santa Fe, or had something terrible happened to him? She would never know. That was the hardest part. Not knowing if he had abandoned her, or if circumstances beyond his control had kept him away. Not knowing if he thought of her at all, or if she had been nothing more than a pleasant diversion during his time in Arizona. The next morning, Eliza went to see her father at the church. Reverend Hartwell was in his study, preparing his sermon for the upcoming Sunday service. He looked up when she knocked, his stern face softening slightly at the sight of her. Eliza, I was beginning to think you had forgotten about your old father. It has been nearly a week since you came to Sunday dinner. I am sorry, Papa, I have not been feeling well. It was not a lie. The morning sickness had been brutal, though she had managed to hide it from everyone. You do look pale." He set down his pen and gestured for her to sit. "What brings you here today?" Eliza sat in the straight-backed chair across from his desk and folded her hands in her lap. She had rehearsed this conversation a dozen times in her head, but now that the moment was here, the words felt clumsy and false. "I have been offered a position in Tucson," she began. "Mrs. Calloway's sister runs a boarding house there, and she needs help caring for one of her elderly tenants. The woman is bedridden and requires constant attention. The pay is good, and I would have my own room and board included." Her father frowned. "Tucson, that is quite a distance. When would you leave?" "Within a few days. Mrs. Calloway has already written to her sister, and the position needs to be filled immediately." "I see." Reverend Hartwell leaned back in his chair, studying her with those sharp eyes that had always seemed to see straight through to her soul. "And you wish to take this position?" "I do. I cannot live on your charity forever, Papa. I need to make my own way, and this is a good opportunity." There was a long silence. Eliza held her breath, waiting for him to question her further, to demand more details, to somehow divine the truth she was so desperately trying to hide. But finally he nodded. "You are right. You are a grown woman, and you need to build your own life. I have perhaps held you too close since your mother passed. It is natural that you should want independence." He paused. "But Tucson is rough country, Eliza. Promise me you will be careful. Promise me you will write regularly so I know you are safe." "I promise, Papa." The guilt was like a stone in her chest, heavy and cold. She hated lying to him, but the truth would hurt him far more than any lie ever could. He rose and came around the desk, pulling her into an awkward embrace. Her father had never been comfortable with displays of affection, and this stiff hug was as much as he could manage. "You will always have a home here, daughter. If Tucson does not suit you, you can return. Remember that." "I will remember." Eliza blinked back tears. "Thank you, Papa." 3 days later, she boarded the stage to Tucson with a single trunk containing all her worldly possessions. Mrs. Calloway rode with her to the stage office, pressing a small purse of coins into her hand at the last moment. "For emergencies," the older woman said. "And do not worry about your father. I will keep an eye on him and let him know how you are faring." The journey to Tucson took 2 days over rough, dusty roads that jolted every bone in Eliza's body. By the time the stage pulled into the depot on Congress Street, she was exhausted and nauseated and desperately homesick for a place she could never return to. Mrs. Calloway's sister, Martha Brennan, was waiting at the depot with a wagon. She was shorter and rounder than her sister, with a round, cheerful face and kind eyes that immediately put Eliza at ease. "You must be Miss Hartwell," she said, helping Eliza down from the stage. "Welcome to Tucson. I hope the journey was not too terrible." "It was bearable," Eliza managed. "Thank you for taking me in, Mrs. Brennan. Your sister has been so kind. Family helps family, dear, and my sister considers you family now." Martha loaded Eliza's trunk into the wagon with surprising strength. "Come along, let us get you settled. You look like you could use a good meal and a soft bed." The boarding house was a sprawling adobe structure on the outskirts of town, surrounded by mesquite trees and flowering cactus. It was larger than Mrs. Calloway's place in Tombstone, with a dozen rooms that Martha rented to miners, merchants, and travelers passing through. The room she showed Eliza to was small but clean, with a real bed instead of a cot and a window that looked out over the dusty yard. "Most of my boarders are men, so you will want to be careful," Martha said as she helped Eliza unpack. "They are decent sorts, but a young woman alone must always be cautious. You will take your meals in the kitchen with me rather than in the dining room with the others. It is better that way." "I understand." Eliza sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by everything that had happened. A week ago, she had been in Tombstone, living the only life she had ever known. Now she was in a strange city, pregnant and alone, pretending to be someone she was not. Martha sat beside her and patted her hand. "I know this is difficult, dear. My sister explained your situation in her letter, but you are safe here and no one will judge you under my roof. You will help me with the cooking and cleaning to earn your keep, and when your time comes, there is a midwife in town who is discreet and skilled. After the baby is born, we will figure out the next steps together. You are too kind, Eliza whispered. Nonsense. I have lived long enough to know that women bear the burdens of this world while men make the messes. You are not the first girl to find herself in this situation, and you will not be the last. What matters is that you and your baby are healthy and safe. Over the following weeks, Eliza settled into a new routine. She rose before dawn to help Martha prepare breakfast for the boarders. She spent her days washing linens, scrubbing floors, and preparing meals. The work was hard, but it kept her mind occupied and her hands busy. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, her body began to change. By October, her dresses no longer fit properly across the middle, and she had to let out the seams. By November, there was no hiding the gentle swell of her belly, though Martha had instructed her to tell anyone who asked that she was a widow, that her husband had died in a mine collapse in Bisbee. It was a common enough story in Arizona Territory, and no one questioned it. The baby began to move in December, tiny flutters that grew stronger each day. Eliza would lie in bed at night with her hands on her stomach, feeling those small kicks and wondering what James would think if he knew. Did he ever think about her? Did he ever regret leaving? Or had he moved on with his life, never knowing that he had left a part of himself behind? She tried not to think about him too much. It hurt too badly. But late at night, when the house was quiet and she was alone with her thoughts, his face would appear in her mind unbidden. His smile. His laugh. The way his hands had felt against her skin. The promises he had made that summer night by the river. Christmas came and went quietly. Martha prepared a special dinner, and a few of the boarders gathered in the dining room to share the meal. Eliza stayed in the kitchen, helping to serve, trying not to think about the holidays she had spent with her father in Tombstone. She had written him several letters, carefully crafted to sound cheerful and content, but his responses had been brief and formal. She suspected he sensed something was wrong but chose not to press her on it. January brought cooler weather and the growing realization that her time was approaching. The midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Torres, came to examine her and declared that the baby would likely arrive in late February or early March. "You are healthy and strong," Mrs. Torres said in her accented English. "The baby is in a good position. You should have no trouble when the time comes." But Eliza was terrified. She had no mother to guide her through this experience, no husband to hold her hand. She would face the most dangerous and painful event of her life alone, and there was no guarantee she would survive it. Women died in childbirth all the time. Strong women, healthy women. Women who had everything to live for. She began to pray more fervently than she had since her mother's death. Not to the stern, judgmental God her father preached about, but to the gentler God her mother had believed in. The God who forgave mistakes and loved unconditionally. She prayed for strength. She prayed for survival. And sometimes, in her weakest moments, she prayed that James would somehow find his way back to her. February arrived with unseasonably warm weather. Eliza's back ached constantly now, and walking more than a few steps left her breathless. Martha had taken over most of the housework, insisting that Eliza rest and preserve her strength for what was coming. On the morning of February 23rd, Eliza woke to a strange sensation, a tightening across her belly that made her gasp. At first she thought it was just the baby moving, but then it came again, stronger this time, and she knew. "Martha," she called out, her voice tight with fear. "Martha, I think it is time." The next 12 hours were a blur of pain and fear and exhaustion. Mrs. Torres arrived and took charge, issuing calm instructions while Martha held Eliza's hand and murmured encouragement. The pain was unlike anything Eliza had ever experienced, wave after wave of agony that left her gasping and sobbing. "You are doing well," Mrs. Torres kept saying. "The baby is coming, just a little longer now." But it felt like forever. It felt like the pain would never end, like she was being torn apart from the inside. She screamed until her throat was raw. She gripped Martha's hand so hard she left bruises. And then, just when she thought she could not endure another moment, there was a final, tremendous push, and suddenly the pain eased. A baby's cry filled the room, thin and outraged and utterly perfect. "A boy," Mrs. Torres announced, holding up the tiny, squirming infant. "You have a son, Mrs. Hartwell? A son." Eliza collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face as Mrs. Torres cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket. When the midwife placed him in her arms, Eliza looked down at the tiny face and felt her heart break and heal simultaneously. He was perfect. Impossibly small, impossibly fragile, but perfect. He had a dusting of dark hair and tiny, delicate features. His eyes were squeezed shut and his little fists waved in the air as he cried. "Hello, little one," Eliza whispered, her voice trembling. "I am your mama, and I love you so much." The baby quieted at the sound of her voice, his tiny face turning toward her. In that moment, everything else fell away. The pain, the fear, the loneliness, none of it mattered. She had this child, this perfect little boy who was half hers and half James's, and she would do whatever it took to protect him and raise him and give him a good life. "Have you thought about what you will name him?" Martha asked softly. Eliza had thought about little else for months. "James," she said. "His name is James Thomas Hartwell, after his father and my grandfather." Over the following weeks, Eliza recovered from the birth and learned how to care for her son. It was exhausting and overwhelming and wonderful all at once. Little James was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in long stretches that allowed Eliza to rest. But there were also nights when he cried for hours, and she walked the floor with him, singing lullabies her mother had once sung to her. She wrote to her father, telling him that the elderly woman she had been caring for had passed away, but that she had decided to stay in Tucson and had found work as a seamstress. She did not mention the baby. She could not bear to put that truth into words, to see her shame and her joy reduced to ink on paper. Spring came to Tucson with a riot of wildflowers blooming across the desert. Eliza began taking James outside in the mornings, letting him feel the sunshine on his face while she sat in the shade of the mesquite trees. He was growing quickly, his tiny features becoming more defined, and sometimes Eliza could see James McCade in the shape of his eyes or the curve of his mouth. She wondered if the elder James would ever know he had a son. She wondered if he would care. And she wondered how she would explain to little James when he was old enough to ask why he had no father. What story would she tell him? What lies would she have to construct to protect him from the truth? But those were worries for another day. For now, she focused on the present, on keeping her son healthy and happy, on building a life for them in this strange new place that had become their home. The months passed quickly. By summer, little James was sitting up on his own and babbling in a language only he understood. By fall, he was crawling everywhere, getting into everything, and Eliza had to watch him constantly to keep him out of trouble. He was a curious, active child with a ready smile and a laugh that filled her heart with joy. She had found work taking in sewing and mending from some of the wealthier families in Tucson, which brought in a little extra money. Martha refused to charge her rent, saying that the help with the boarding house was payment enough, but Eliza insisted on contributing what she could. She was determined not to be a burden, determined to prove that she could provide for herself and her son. By the time little James's first birthday arrived in February of 1884, Eliza had built a life she could be proud of. It was not the life she had imagined for herself 2 years ago. It was smaller, harder, filled with more work and worry than she had ever known. But it was hers, and she had created it with her own 2 hands, and no one could take that away from her. She made a small cake for James's birthday, and Martha invited a few of the other women from town who had young children. They gathered in the parlor while the babies played on a quilt spread across the floor, and for a little while, Eliza felt almost normal. almost like the respectable young widow she pretended to be. But late that night, after James was asleep in his cradle and the house was quiet, Eliza allowed herself to think about the man who should have been there to celebrate this milestone. Where was James McCade now? Was he alive? Was he well? Did he ever think about the girl he had left behind in Tombstone? She would never know. And perhaps that was for the best. She had built a life without him, and she and little James were surviving. They did not need him, or so she told herself. Spring turned to summer and summer to fall. Little James learned to walk, taking his first wobbling steps in October while Martha clapped and cheered. He was talking now too, simple words like mama and more and no, which he used frequently and emphatically. Eliza's days were full of caring for him, helping Martha, and taking in sewing work whenever she could. She had managed to save a small amount of money, which she kept hidden in a tin box under her bed. It was not much, but it was something, a cushion against disaster. A promise that she could take care of her son no matter what happened. In December, a letter arrived from her father. It was longer than his usual brief responses, and as Eliza read it, her heart sank. My dear daughter, he had written in his precise, careful hand. I have been offered a position at a church in California, and I have decided to accept it. Tombstone has changed greatly since you left. The mines are playing out and people are leaving in droves. There is nothing left for me here. I will be departing at the end of January. If you wish to say goodbye, you must come soon. Otherwise, I will write to you from my new home in Sacramento when I am settled. Your loving father. Eliza read the letter 3 times, trying to process what it meant. Her father was leaving Arizona. The only connection she still had to her old life was disappearing. Part of her felt relieved. With her father in California, there was less chance he would ever learn the truth about her situation. But another part of her felt bereft. Despite everything, he was still her father, and the thought of him being so far away left her feeling untethered. She showed the letter to Martha, who read it thoughtfully. Will you go to Tombstone to see him before he leaves? I do not know if I can, Eliza said. How would I explain James? I could not leave him here, and I could not take him with me without revealing the truth. Perhaps it is time to tell your father the truth, Martha suggested gently. He is leaving anyway. What harm could it do now? But Eliza could not bring herself to do it. Her father's good opinion meant too much, even if it was based on a lie. She wrote back instead, explaining that she could not leave Tucson because of her work commitments and wishing him well in California. She enclosed a small tintype photograph of herself that had been taken at a studio in town, carefully angled so that nothing in the background would reveal her circumstances. His response came in late January, brief and formal as always. He was disappointed she could not come, but he understood. He would write once he was settled in Sacramento. He wished her well. And just like that, her last connection to her old life was severed. She was truly alone now, with only Martha and little James and the life she had built in Tucson. Winter gave way to spring once more. Little James was growing so quickly now, long and lean with his father's build. He was talking more each day, asking endless questions about everything he saw. What is that, Mama? Why is the sky blue? Where do the birds go at night? Eliza answered as best she could, marveling at his curiosity and intelligence. In April, Martha came to her with unexpected news. My nephew is coming to visit from Texas, she said. He is a cattleman looking to expand his operation into Arizona. He will be staying here for several weeks while he scouts locations for a new ranch. Eliza thought nothing of it. Boarders came and went all the time, but when Martha's nephew arrived a week later, Eliza understood why Martha had mentioned it specifically. His name was Daniel Brennan, and he was perhaps 30 years old, tall and broad-shouldered with sandy hair and warm brown eyes. He was polite and well-spoken, and he went out of his way to be kind to little James, who was fascinated by the stranger with his weathered leather chaps and jangling spurs. Daniel had dinner in the kitchen that first night at Martha's insistence, and he told stories about his ranch in Texas and his plans for the future. He was clearly well-educated despite his rough appearance, and he had a quick wit that made even Eliza laugh. "You have a fine boy there, Mrs. Hartwell," he said, watching as James played with a set of wooden blocks on the floor. "How old is he?" "He will be 2 in February," Eliza said. "And please call me Eliza." "Only if you call me Daniel," he smiled. "My aunt tells me your husband passed away. I am sorry for your loss." The familiar lie came easily now. "Thank you, it was a mining accident, very sudden." "Those mines are dangerous places, too many good men lost." Daniel turned his attention back to James. "But at least he left you with a fine legacy. That boy is going to be a heartbreaker when he grows up." Over the following weeks, Daniel became a regular presence in the house. He was gone most days, riding out to survey land and meet with potential business partners. But in the evenings, he would return and spend time in the kitchen, helping Martha with chores and playing with James, who adored him. Eliza found herself looking forward to those evenings more than she cared to admit. Daniel was easy to talk to, and he treated her with a respect and kindness she had not experienced from a man in a long time. He never pressed her for details about her past, never made her feel uncomfortable or judged. He simply accepted her as she was. One evening in late May, after James had been put to bed, Daniel asked Eliza if she would like to take a walk. Martha shooed them out of the kitchen with a knowing smile, and they walked slowly through the twilight streets of Tucson. "I have found a location for my ranch," Daniel said as they walked. "It is about 20 miles north of here, good grazing land with a creek running through it. I will be heading back to Texas next week to arrange for my cattle to be driven here." "That is wonderful," Eliza said, trying to ignore the pang of disappointment she felt at the news of his departure. "I am sure you will be very successful." "I hope so." "It is a risk, starting over in new territory, but sometimes risks are worth taking." He paused, then added quietly, "I have enjoyed my time here, Eliza, more than I expected to." She did not know how to respond to that, so she said nothing. They walked in comfortable silence for a while before Daniel spoke again. "My aunt told me the truth about you," he said gently, "about your situation." Eliza stopped walking, her heart pounding. "What did she tell you? That you are not a widow? That you came here because you were with child and unmarried? That the father of your son abandoned you?" Daniel turned to face her. "I am not telling you this to upset you. I am telling you because I want you to know that it does not matter to me. Who you were or what happened before does not change who you are now, and the woman I have come to know these past weeks is remarkable." Tears pricked at Eliza's eyes. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I would like to write to you while I am in Texas. And when I return to Arizona, I would like to court you properly if you would allow it." He reached out and gently took her hand. "I know it is too soon. I know you barely know me, but I have not been able to stop thinking about you since the day I arrived. You are strong and kind and a wonderful mother, and I would consider myself the luckiest man alive if you would give me a chance." Eliza stared at him, scarcely able to believe what she was hearing. "You want to court me, knowing everything, especially knowing everything. You made a mistake, Eliza, one mistake. That does not define you, and little James deserves a father who will love him and raise him as his own. I could be that father if you would let me." She wanted to say yes. She wanted to throw herself into his arms and accept his offer and never look back. But the memory of James McCade, of another man who had made promises, held her back. "I need time to think," she whispered. "This is all so sudden." "Of course. Take all the time you need. I will be gone for 2 months, maybe 3. When I return, you can give me your answer." He squeezed her hand gently. "I will wait as long as it takes, Eliza. You are worth waiting for." He left for Texas the following week, and Eliza was left to contemplate his proposal. Martha was thrilled at the prospect of her nephew courting Eliza, but she did not press the matter. "Daniel is a good man," she said. "But you must follow your heart, dear. Do not marry him out of gratitude or necessity. Marry him only if you can love him." But could she love him? Eliza did not know. She had loved James McCade with the fierce, reckless passion of youth. What she felt for Daniel was different, quieter, safer. But was that love? Or was it just the desire for security and companionship? The summer months passed slowly. Daniel wrote to her every week, long letters filled with news about his ranch preparations and questions about her life and James's development. His letters were warm and funny and thoughtful, and Eliza found herself looking forward to them more and more. She wrote back, carefully at first, but gradually opening up about her thoughts and feelings. She told him about her childhood in Tombstone, about her mother's death and her father's stern nature. She told him about James McCade too, the whole story, holding nothing back. If Daniel wanted to court her, he deserved to know everything. His response came 3 weeks later. "I am sorry for what you went through," he wrote, "and I am sorry that McCade was not the man you thought he was, but I am grateful that you trusted me with your story. It does not change how I feel about you. If anything, it makes me admire you more. You survived something that would have broken a lesser woman, and you built a good life for yourself and your son. That takes courage." By the time September arrived, Eliza had made her decision. When Daniel returned to Arizona, she would accept his courtship. She would give him a chance to prove himself. And if he was true to his word, if he truly could love James as his own, then perhaps she could learn to love him in return. But Daniel did not return in September, or October, or November. The letters stopped coming in early October, and Eliza began to worry that history was repeating itself. Had Daniel changed his mind? Had he met someone else in Texas? Or had something happened to him? Martha wrote to her other relatives in Texas, trying to learn news of Daniel's whereabouts, but the responses were vague. He had left his ranch in the care of his foreman and departed for Arizona months ago, but he had never arrived. As winter approached and Christmas came and went with no word from Daniel, Eliza resigned herself to the truth. She had been abandoned again. Whatever feelings Daniel had expressed had been false, or he had thought better of them once he was away from her. It did not matter. She had survived one abandonment. She would survive another. James's third birthday arrived in February of 1886. He was a bright, energetic child now, full of questions and mischief. He had started helping Martha with simple chores around the boarding house, and the other boarders had adopted him as a sort of mascot. He was happy and healthy and loved, and that was what mattered. But Eliza could not help feeling a deep sadness that she tried to hide from her son. 2 men had promised her forever, and both had disappeared. Perhaps she was not meant to be loved. Perhaps this life, alone with her son, was all she would ever have. March brought warm weather and dust storms that coated everything in a fine layer of grit. Eliza was in the kitchen preparing lunch when one of the boarders, a grizzled prospector named Hank, came rushing in. "Mrs. Brennan, you better come quick. There is a man outside asking for you, says his name is McCade." Eliza dropped the spoon she was holding. It clattered against the floor, but she barely heard it over the roaring in her ears. "What did you say?" "McCade, James McCade, says he is looking for someone who used to live in Tombstone." Hank scratched his beard. "Seems mighty desperate, been riding hard from the look of his horse." Eliza's legs felt like water. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. "Where is he?" "Out front." Hank looked concerned. "You all right, Mrs. Hartwell? You look like you have seen a ghost." She did not answer. She pushed past him and walked through the house on shaking legs, out the front door and onto the porch. And there, standing beside a dust-covered horse, was James McCade. He looked older, thinner. There was a scar on his left cheek that had not been there before, and his clothes were worn and travel-stained. But it was unmistakably him. The same blue eyes, the same dark hair though longer now, the same face that haunted her dreams. He saw her and went completely still. Eliza. She could not speak, could not breathe, could not do anything but stare at him. He took a step toward her, his expression a mixture of hope and fear and something else she could not name. "Eliza, I have been searching for you for months. I went back to Tombstone, but you were gone." Your father was gone. No one knew where you had gone. I have ridden to every town in Arizona Territory trying to find you. You left, she finally managed to say. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, high and thin. You promised you would come back in 2 weeks, and you never did. You never wrote, you never sent word. I could not. James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she remembered so well it made her chest ache. My father died, and then my brother got himself into trouble with some bad men in Santa Fe. They took me too, held us both for ransom. By the time I managed to escape and get back to Tombstone, it was almost a year later. You were gone, and no one would tell me where you went. Mrs. Calloway knew, Eliza said. She arranged for me to come here. She told me she did not know where you were. She said you had moved on, that I should leave you alone. James's voice cracked. I thought you had married someone else. I thought I had lost you forever. But I could not give up. I had to know. I had to find you and at least apologize for breaking my promise, even if you hated me. Eliza wrapped her arms around herself. She did not know what to feel. Relief that he was alive. Anger that he had not tried harder to contact her. Confusion about what this meant for the life she had built. You should have written. I did write. I wrote dozens of letters. None of them were answered. He took another step closer. Eliza, please, I know I have no right to ask anything of you. I know you probably moved on with your life, but I never stopped loving you. Not for one single day. You have to believe that. Before she could respond, a small voice called out from behind her. Mama, who is that man? Eliza turned to see James standing in the doorway, his small hand gripping the doorframe. He was looking at the stranger with wide, curious eyes. The older James stared at the boy, and Eliza watched as realization slowly dawned on his face. He looked at little James, then at Eliza, then back at the boy. The color drained from his face. Eliza, he whispered. Is he? She lifted her chin, forcing herself to meet his eyes. His name is James Thomas Hartwell. He will be 3 years old next month, and yes, he is yours. James McCade staggered back a step, his hand going to his chest as though he had been struck. His eyes never left the little boy in the doorway. I have a son, you have a son. Eliza's voice was steady now, though inside she was shaking apart. I tried to tell you. I wrote to you in Santa Fe, but the letter came back undeliverable. I had no way to reach you, and you never came back. James looked like he might collapse. He sank down onto the porch steps, his hands covering his face. When he looked up again, there were tears streaming down his cheeks. I have a son, he repeated. Dear God, Eliza, I am so sorry. I am so sorry I was not here for you, that you had to go through everything alone. Little James had ventured out onto the porch now, fascinated by the crying man. Why is he sad, Mama? Eliza picked up her son and held him close. He is not sad, sweetheart. He is happy. I do not understand. James tilted his head, studying the stranger. Who is he? Eliza looked at James McCade, at the father of her child who had finally returned. She did not know what happened next. She did not know if she could forgive him, if she could trust him again. But as she looked at his tear-stained face and saw the raw emotion there, she knew one thing with certainty. He had not abandoned her intentionally. He had been kept away against his will, and he had spent months searching for her. This is an old friend of Mama's, she said to little James. His name is James too. Like me? The boy's eyes lit up. Yes, sweetheart, just like you. Martha appeared in the doorway, alerted by the commotion. She took in the scene with sharp eyes, then gently took little James from Eliza's arms. Come along, young man. Let us go make cookies while your mama talks to her friend. After Martha had taken James inside, Eliza sat down on the steps beside James McCade. They sat in silence for a long moment, both of them trying to process everything that had happened. Tell me everything, James finally said. Please, Eliza, I need to know. So she told him. She told him about discovering she was pregnant, about the fear and shame and loneliness. She told him about Mrs. Calloway's kindness and her flight from Tombstone. She told him about the birth and the long months of learning to be a mother while grieving for the man she thought had abandoned her. She told him about Daniel Brennan too, about his proposal and his subsequent disappearance. James listened to it all without interrupting, his expression growing more anguished with every word. When she finally fell silent, he turned to her with red-rimmed eyes. "I failed you," he said hoarsely. "In every way that mattered, I failed you. You needed me and I was not there." "You could not have known," Eliza said, though the words felt hollow. "You were being held prisoner." "I should have tried harder to get word to you. I should have found a way." He shook his head. "And now you have built a life without me. You are going to marry someone else." "I have no right to come back now and disrupt everything." "Daniel is gone," Eliza said. "He disappeared just like you did, except I do not think he is coming back. I think he changed his mind about me." "Then he is a fool." James reached out hesitantly, his hand hovering near hers but not quite touching. "Eliza, I know I have no right to ask this, but will you give me a chance to prove myself? Let me be the father our son deserves. Let me be the man I should have been for you all along." Eliza looked at his hand, so close to hers yet not daring to touch. She thought about the past 4 years, about all the pain and struggle and loneliness. She thought about the life she had built for herself and little James, a life that did not need a man to be complete. But she also thought about the nights she had cried herself to sleep, wondering what had happened to the man she loved. She thought about her son, who deserved to know his father. "I do not know if I can trust you," she said honestly. "I do not know if I can go through that kind of heartbreak again." "I understand, and I will spend the rest of my life earning your trust if you will let me." James's voice was raw with emotion. "I love you, Eliza. I never stopped loving you, and I already love our son even though I just met him. Please, just give me a chance." Before Eliza could answer, the front door opened and little James came barreling out, a cookie in each hand. "Mama, Aunt Martha says I can give one to the man if he is nice. Are you nice, Mr. James?" The older James looked at his son with such naked longing that Eliza's heart cracked wide open. "I hope to be," he said softly. "I am going to try very hard to be nice." "Okay." Little James held out one of the cookies. "You can have this one. Aunt Martha made them, so they are very good." James took the cookie with a trembling hand. "Thank you, son. That is very kind of you." "You are welcome." The boy smiled, then climbed onto the step between his parents. "You have the same name as me. That is funny." "It is funny," James agreed, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Your mama named you well." Little James munched on his cookie, perfectly content to sit between these two adults who were staring at each other over his head. Eliza saw the question in James McCade's eyes, the desperate hope, and she felt something shift inside her chest. The anger she had carried for so long began to crack and crumble, not disappearing entirely but loosening its grip on her heart. "You can stay," she heard herself say. "You can stay and get to know your son. But James, if you leave again, if you disappear or break another promise, I will not give you another chance. I cannot go through that again. I swear to you, on everything I hold sacred, I will never leave you again." James reached across their son and gently took her hand. "I will prove to you that I am worthy of your trust, however long it takes." Martha insisted that James McCade stay at the boarding house while he got to know his son. She gave him a small room on the first floor and put him to work helping with repairs and maintenance to earn his keep. James accepted gratefully, clearly willing to do whatever was necessary to remain close to Eliza and little James. The first few days were awkward. Little James was shy around the stranger who shared his name, clinging to Eliza's skirts and watching James McCade with wary eyes. But James was patient. He did not push or demand attention. He simply made himself present, helping Martha with chores, fixing the loose boards on the porch, repairing the wobbly table in the kitchen. Gradually, little James's curiosity overcame his caution. He began to follow James around, asking questions about what he was doing and why. James answered every question seriously, treating the little boy with a respect that made Eliza's heart ache. He showed little James how to hold a hammer, how to measure a board, how to tie a proper knot in a rope. "You are a smart boy," James told his son one afternoon while they were working together on the porch. "And strong too. You are going to grow up to be quite a man." Mama says I am strong like my papa, little James said proudly, James's hand stilled on the board he was sanding. He glanced at Eliza, who was watching from the doorway, and she saw the emotion in his eyes. Your mama is right, he said quietly. You have a good papa, the best papa a boy could ask for. Eliza knew he was not talking about himself. He was talking about the man she had described to their son, the imaginary father she had created to fill the void. And she realized that James McCade was trying to live up to that impossible standard, trying to become the man she had invented. As the days turned into weeks, James began to settle into life at the boarding house. He found work at her ranch outside of town, riding out before dawn and returning in the evenings covered in dust and smelling of horses. He gave most of his wages to Martha to help cover his expenses, but Eliza noticed that he was also saving money, carefully setting aside coins in a leather pouch he kept in his room. In the evenings, after supper was finished and the dishes were washed, James would play with little James in the yard. They would toss a ball back and forth, or James would give his son rides on his shoulders, galloping around like a horse while little James shrieked with laughter. Eliza would watch from the porch, mending clothes or shelling beans, her heart caught between joy and sorrow. This was what should have been. This was the life they should have had all along, and yet she could not quite bring herself to trust it, to believe that this time would be different. James seemed to understand her hesitation. He never pressed her for more than she was willing to give. He never tried to kiss her or hold her hand or make any claim on her beyond his role as little James's father. He was respectful and patient, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, Eliza began to relax around him. They began taking walks in the evenings after little James was in bed, strolling through the quiet streets of Tucson while James told her about his experiences in Santa Fe. He described his father's death, the grief he had barely had time to process before his brother's troubles engulfed them both. He told her about being held prisoner, about the beatings and the fear and the desperate escape that had nearly cost him his life. He showed her the scar on his cheek and other scars hidden beneath his clothes, evidence of the violence he had endured. I thought about you every day, he told her one night as they sat on a bench in the town square. When things were at their worst, when I thought I might not survive, I would think about that night by the river. I would remember how you felt in my arms, how you looked at me like I was the only man in the world. That memory kept me alive, Eliza. It gave me a reason to keep fighting. I thought you had forgotten me, Eliza admitted. I thought perhaps I had meant nothing to you, that you had moved on with your life and never looked back. Never. I could never forget you. James turned to face her, his expression earnest in the moonlight. You are the only woman I have ever loved, the only woman I will ever love. Eliza wanted to believe him. She wanted to let go of the hurt and anger and fear that had protected her heart for so long, but it was hard, so hard. I need time, she said softly. I need to know that this is real. That you are really here to stay. I will give you all the time you need, James promised. I am not going anywhere. Spring gave way to early summer. Little James's 4th birthday came and went with a small celebration. James McCade gave his son a carved wooden horse that he had made himself, and the boy's face lit up with such joy that even Eliza had to smile. This is the best present ever, little James declared, galloping around the yard with his new toy. Thank you, Mr. James. You can call me Papa if you want to, James said quietly, if that would be all right with you. Little James stopped running and looked at his mother uncertainly. Can I, Mama? Eliza's throat tightened. This was the moment she had been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. If she said yes, she was acknowledging James McCade as her son's father, accepting him back into their lives permanently. If she said no, she would be denying her son the one thing he had always wanted, a father. If you want to, she finally said. It is your choice, sweetheart. Little James looked between his parents, then nodded decisively. Okay, Papa. He tried out the word, then grinned. Papa, come play horses with me. James's eyes filled with tears, but he was smiling as he chased after his son, neighing like a horse and making little James giggle uncontrollably. Watching them together, Eliza felt the last of her defenses begin to crumble. This man had searched for her for months. He had crossed deserts and mountains trying to find her. He had endured imprisonment and torture, and the first thing he did when he finally escaped was come looking for her. That was not the action of a man who did not care. That was the action of a man who loved her, and she still loved him. Despite everything, despite the years of pain and loneliness, she had never stopped loving him. That night, after little James was asleep and the house was quiet, Eliza found James sitting on the porch staring up at the stars. She sat down beside him, and for a long moment they simply sat in comfortable silence. "I have been saving money," James finally said. "I have almost enough to make a down payment on a small piece of land. Nothing fancy, just a few acres where I could build a house and maybe run a few head of cattle. I have been thinking that if I could establish myself, prove that I can provide for you and little James, then maybe you would consider marrying me." Eliza's heart hammered in her chest. "You want to marry me, more than anything in this world." James turned to look at her, and in the moonlight, she could see the depth of his feelings written plainly on his face. "I know I have no right to ask. I know I do not deserve you, but I want to give our son a real family. I want to give you the life I promised you 4 years ago. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to grow old with you, Eliza, if you will have me." She should say no. She should protect herself, protect her son, guard against the possibility of future heartbreak. But as she looked at this man who had fought so hard to find her, who loved their son with such fierce devotion, who looked at her like she was the answer to every prayer he had ever prayed, she found she could not say no. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." James stared at her as though he could not believe what he had heard. "Yes, you truly mean yes. I mean yes." Eliza reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I am tired of being afraid, James. I am tired of protecting myself from happiness. I love you. I have always loved you, and I want to be your wife." James pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I will make you happy," he murmured against her hair. "I swear to you I will spend every day of my life making you happy." "You already make me happy," Eliza said, and realized it was true. Somewhere along the way, without her quite noticing, happiness had crept back into her life. They were married in July, in a simple ceremony at a small church in Tucson with Martha as their witness. Eliza wore a simple blue dress that Martha had helped her make, and James wore his best clothes, his hair neatly trimmed and his boots polished to a shine. Little James stood between them, holding a ring that was too big for his small hands, beaming with pride at his important role. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed Eliza gently, reverently, as though she were something precious and fragile. And for the first time in 4 years, Eliza allowed herself to believe that everything might actually be all right. They could not afford a honeymoon, so they spent their wedding night in James's small room at the boarding house, with little James sleeping in a cot beside their bed. It was not romantic or elegant, but it was theirs, and that was enough. In the weeks that followed, James worked tirelessly to finish saving enough money for their land. Eliza continued helping Martha and taking in sewing work, and together they built up a small nest egg. By September, they had enough for a down payment on 20 acres about 10 miles outside of Tucson, with a small cabin already on the property and access to a reliable water source. The cabin was rough and needed work, but it was theirs. James spent every spare moment fixing it up, patching the roof and reinforcing the walls and building a proper bed frame. Eliza scrubbed and cleaned and made curtains for the windows. Little James helped as best he could, fetching tools and handing nails to his father with solemn concentration. They moved into the cabin in late October, when the brutal Arizona summer had finally given way to cooler fall weather. It was just one large room with a sleeping loft for little James, but it felt like a palace after years of living in boarding houses. That first night in their new home, after little James had been tucked into his loft and they were alone in the darkness, James held Eliza close and whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" she asked. "For giving me another chance. For letting me be a father to our son, for becoming my wife." He kissed her softly. "For loving me even after I failed you so badly." "You did not fail me, James. Life failed both of us, but we survived and now we are together, and that is what matters." They made love that night with a tenderness that brought tears to Eliza's eyes. This was different from that night by the river 4 years ago, different from the desperate passion of youth. This was deeper, richer, grounded in knowledge and trust, and the profound intimacy of shared struggles overcome. Afterward, lying in the darkness with James's arms around her and the sound of their sons breathing from the loft above, Eliza felt a peace she had not known since her mother died. This was home. This was family. This was the life she had always wanted but thought she could never have. The months that followed were hard work, but filled with joy. James took on odd jobs at nearby ranches to supplement their income while slowly building up their own small herd of cattle. Eliza planted a garden and continued taking in sewing work. Little James started learning his letters, sitting at the rough table while Eliza taught him to write his name. In the spring of 1887, Eliza realized she was pregnant again. She told James one evening after little James was asleep, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. James's face went white, then red, then broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen. "A baby, we are going to have another baby in December, I think, maybe January." Eliza felt tears prick at her eyes. "Are you happy?" "Happy." James pulled her into his arms and spun her around, laughing. "Eliza, I am the happiest man alive." A baby, another child, this pregnancy was different from the first. This time, Eliza was not alone and afraid. This time, she had a husband who doted on her, who insisted she rest when she was tired and fixed her bland foods when the smell of cooking meat made her nauseous. James was attentive and loving, and even little James seemed to sense that something special was happening, becoming more protective of his mama. In December, on a cold night when the wind howled outside their little cabin, Eliza went into labor. James rode through the darkness to fetch the midwife while Martha, who had come to stay with them for the last few weeks, tended to Eliza. The labor was shorter this time but no less intense. Eliza gritted her teeth and bore down when Martha told her to, and just after midnight a baby's cry filled the cabin. "A girl," Martha announced, wrapping the infant in a clean blanket. "A beautiful, healthy girl." James burst through the door moments later, the midwife right behind him. He rushed to Eliza's side, his eyes wide with concern. "Are you all right? Is the baby all right?" "We are both fine," Eliza said, exhausted but smiling. "Come meet your daughter." James took the tiny bundle from Martha with shaking hands, staring down at the small, red face with an expression of absolute wonder. "She is perfect," he whispered. "What should we name her?" Eliza had been thinking about this for months. "Sarah," she said, "after my mother. Sarah McCade." James tested the name, then nodded. "It is perfect. She is perfect. You are perfect." He bent and kissed Eliza's forehead. "Thank you for this gift, my love." Little James, who had been awakened by the commotion, came down from his loft and peered curiously at the baby. "Is that my sister?" "It is," James said, kneeling down so his son could see better. "Her name is Sarah, and you are going to be the best big brother she could ask for." "I will protect her," little James said solemnly, "just like Papa protects Mama." Eliza's heart swelled with love for her little family. This was everything she had ever wanted. Everything she had thought she lost when James disappeared 4 years ago. But they had found their way back to each other, and now they had 2 beautiful children and a life they had built together. The years that followed were good ones. Their small ranch prospered slowly but steadily. James was a hard worker and a shrewd businessman, and gradually they were able to expand their herd and improve their property. They added rooms to the cabin as the children grew, and Eliza planted flower gardens that bloomed brilliant colors against the dun landscape. Little James grew tall and strong, helping his father with the ranch work and doting on his little sister. Sarah was a sweet-natured child with her father's blue eyes and her mother's blonde hair, and both James and little James spoiled her shamelessly. In 1889, another son arrived, whom they named William after James's father. And 2 years after that, twin girls whom they named Emma and Clara. Their little cabin had grown into a proper ranch house by then, with 4 bedrooms and a real parlor and a kitchen big enough for the whole family to gather around the table. On quiet evenings, after the children were in bed, James and Eliza would sit on their porch and watch the sun set over the desert. Sometimes they would talk about the early days, the pain and separation, and the long road that had led them back to each other. But mostly they just sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, grateful for the life they had built and the family they had created. "Do you ever regret it?" James asked one evening. Giving me another chance, Eliza leaned her head against his shoulder. "Never, not for one moment. Even though I caused you so much pain, you did not cause it intentionally, and the pain led us here to this life. If things had been different, if you had come back after 2 weeks like you promised, we might never have appreciated what we have now." She squeezed his hand. "Everything we went through made us stronger. It made our love stronger." James pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Eliza McCade, more today than yesterday and less than I will tomorrow." "I love you too," she whispered. In 1892, a letter arrived from an unexpected source. It was from Daniel Brennan, Martha's nephew who had disappeared years earlier. He wrote to apologize for his sudden departure, explaining that he had been injured in a stampede on his way back to Arizona and had spent nearly a year recovering. By the time he was well enough to travel, he had learned that Eliza was married, and he did not want to cause trouble by reappearing. He was married now himself to a rancher's daughter in Texas, and they had a baby on the way. He wished Eliza and her family well and thanked her for the kindness she had shown him during his brief time in Tucson. Eliza showed the letter to James, who read it thoughtfully. "Are you sorry?" he asked. "That you did not marry him instead? How could I be sorry?" Eliza said, gesturing around at their home, their children playing in the yard, the life they had built. "I have everything I ever wanted right here." And it was true. She had no regrets. The path that had led her here had been painful and difficult, but it had led her to this moment, to this man, to this family. And she would not change a single thing. Years continued to pass in a blur of work and laughter and love. Little James grew into a fine young man who eventually took over much of the ranch operations, allowing his father to slow down a bit. Sarah married a neighboring rancher's son and settled nearby, giving Eliza and James their first grandchildren. William became a teacher, something that made Eliza enormously proud. The twins, Emma and Clara, were inseparable and eventually opened a dress shop in Tucson. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1907, James surprised Eliza with a trip back to Tombstone. The town had changed dramatically since she had left. Many of the old buildings were gone or falling into ruin. The mines had mostly closed and the population had dwindled. But the church where her father had preached still stood, and the cottonwood trees by the San Pedro River were still there, taller now and more majestic. They stood beneath those trees on a warm July evening, and James took both of Eliza's hands in his. "This is where it all started," he said softly. "This is where I first told you I loved you. This is where we created our first child, though neither of us knew it at the time." "I remember," Eliza said, smiling. "I was so scared and so happy all at once. I knew I was making a choice that could ruin my life, but I could not bring myself to care. I loved you too much. And I loved you, love you still, will love you until my last breath." James pulled a small box from his pocket. "I never properly proposed to you, Eliza. I never got down on one knee and asked you to be my wife with a ring to seal the promise. I would like to do that now if you will allow me." Eliza's eyes filled with tears as James lowered himself to one knee, his joints creaking a bit with age but his eyes still as blue and clear as they had been 25 years ago. "Eliza Hartwell, McCade, you are the love of my life. You are the mother of my children and the keeper of my heart. You have stood by me through hardship and joy, and you have made every single day of my life better just by being in it. Will you do me the honor of continuing to be my wife for however many years we have left?" "Yes," Eliza said through her tears. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." James slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple gold band with a small diamond. It was not expensive or ostentatious, but it was beautiful, and it represented everything they had built together over the past 2 decades. He stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her beneath the same trees where they had first given themselves to each other all those years ago. And Eliza thought about the frightened young woman she had been, standing on that train platform in Tombstone with a secret growing inside her. That girl had been so afraid, so certain her life was over, but she had been wrong. Her life had not ended that day. It had only been beginning. And what a beautiful life it had turned out to be. They returned home to Arizona to their ranch and their children and grandchildren. And they lived out their days surrounded by love, grateful for every moment they had been given. When James passed away in his sleep at the age of 73, Eliza mourned him deeply, but without regret. They had been given nearly 40 years together, years filled with more love and joy than most people ever knew. She had 5 children who adored her, 14 grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. She had a life rich with meaning and connection. And when her own time came, 6 years later, she went peacefully in her sleep with a smile on her face. Her last thoughts were of that young cowboy who had promised her forever beneath the cottonwood trees, and who had ultimately kept that promise despite all the obstacles that had stood in their way. Their children buried them side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, beneath a sky so blue and wide, it seemed to go on forever. And on the shared headstone, little James, now a man of 52, had inscribed, "James and Eliza McCade together in life. Together in eternity their love was stronger than time, distance, or circumstance," and it was true. Their love had been tested by separation and hardship, by fear and misunderstanding. But in the end, it had endured. It had brought them back together, had given them a family, had filled their lives with meaning and purpose. It was a love story for the ages, one that their children would tell their grandchildren, and their grandchildren would tell their children after that. The story of a young woman who had been left alone with a secret and a cowboy who had searched across desert and mountain to find her again. The story of a cradle that had held a child the father had never known existed until the day he returned and saw it for himself. It was a story of second chances and hard-won happiness, of forgiveness and redemption, of promises made and ultimately kept, even when all seemed lost. And it was a story that proved, beyond any doubt, that true love could survive anything, even time itself. Their legacy lived on through their children and grandchildren, through the ranch they had built and the lives they had touched. And though James and Eliza were gone, their love remained, as permanent and enduring as the Arizona sky above the land they had called home. In the end, that was all that mattered. Not the pain or the separation or the years they had lost, but the love they had found and held on to, and the beautiful life they had created together despite all the odds against them. It was a fitting ending to a story that had begun with heartbreak and uncertainty. And it was proof that sometimes, if you are brave enough and strong enough and willing to forgive, love really can conquer all. Their story was complete, their circle closed. They had lived and loved and built something lasting. And in doing so, they had left the world a little bit brighter than they had found it. That was their legacy. That was their triumph. And it would endure long after they were gone, carried forward in the hearts of everyone who had known them and everyone who would hear their story in the years to come. James and Eliza McCade had found their happily ever after. It had not come easily, and it had not come quickly, but it had come. And it had been worth every struggle, every tear, every moment of doubt, because in the end they had each other. And that was everything.